Hello and welcome to PentaLive from Pentalog. I'm Peter Green in New York, and we're here to help you navigate the complexity of the world in the COVID-19 era. Today, in the first part of our show, what we call DEFCON 19, we're going to be speaking with Pentalog's own David Golub, coming to us from Litchfield County, Connecticut. Hello, David.
Hello, Peter.
How are you?
We're great today. Yeah, it's a beautiful day and delighted to be here.
I'm glad you're with us. We're going to be talking today about agility and how it's so much more than just a buzzword. And just to give one example of why this is relevant, yesterday, President Trump said he was going to disband the coronavirus task force that was led by Mike Pence and included Dr. Fauci by the end of May because the crisis was over and it was time to get back to work. Then this morning, President Trump says, no, I'm not going to disband the task force after all. So you've got this stuff coming in from every direction. Who ever would have expected it? I mean, we're really living in a world of, you call black swans, if you want to use a bit of a cliche these days. How do we deal with this? We've got constant, massive disruption coming to us in every direction at every moment. We're used to a system generally of linear management, the kind of thing that got Henry Ford to make automobiles and brought us the Industrial Revolution, the prosperity we have. But it seems like the real thing we need to be doing is moving on from that and looking at what we call agility. So my question to you, David, the first one is, what exactly is agility and why is it really the only response in this situation?
Well, thank you, Peter. You mentioned a black swan. So we are living in a world that has been subjected to an incredible disruption. And the COVID-19 crisis has transformed in a matter of weeks so many aspects of our world and our daily lives that it's difficult to really take it all in. We can ask a question: did COVID-19 change the world, or did it just reveal the world that was already there that we didn't see? And not to get too philosophical, but if we take the lens of complexity theory, we take the lens of understanding that the world is a highly complex system filled with a multitude of interdependent and independent parts that operate simultaneously, we come away with the notion that the world of complexity and the world of disruption was there, and COVID-19 just laid it bare for us. This world was already in existence, and now it's simply not a deniable fact that we live in it. Previously, and for a long period of time, the Henry Ford production model, the linear system model, worked really well. It has been a great toolkit for producing value. And in many ways, in many small compartmental areas, it will continue to be so. It turns out, though, that it's not a very good toolkit to handle massive disruption. And it's not a good toolkit to handle massive disruption because it doesn't prepare individuals for change.
So how do you prepare individuals for change then? How do you make that jump?
Well, we're coming to this problem, through the concept of agility. Agility or agile is an idea that is probably familiar to most, if not all, of the folks tuning into PentaLive. We know that it comes from the software industry. We know that it's spread into the management consulting world and other sectors of enlightened management. But what does it really mean, and where did it come from? We ask this question because we want to really think about not just the methodological rules, but actually the purpose of agility. And it turns out that software engineers had an early glimpse of what I'll call the undeniability of complexity. Software projects are complex systems. If you've ever been on a software project, it feels a bit like a hurricane. It feels like you're lost in a new city that you've never been to. It's a complex system. And the requirements are in a sense unknown, even if they're highly detailed. The reality is that they're not really known fully. Client expectations aren't fully known. Stakeholder expectations aren't fully known. And so how do we proceed? How do we proceed? How do we make progress and deliver value while acknowledging these massive unknowns? The birth of Agile came from the realization that the command and control linear Henry Ford model was broken. Instead of delivering software projects on time and on budget and meeting all the stakeholder expectations, it did exactly the opposite. And so a new idea came to be, and that idea was Agile.
So we're talking about Agile. What does it represent? We understand, a lot of us understand this in software terms. Don't think that you can lay out a roadmap at the beginning that's going to get you where you need to be 6 or 12 months down the road. There are all kinds of things are going to come up that we couldn't have thought of, and we have to adjust and move and be somewhat autonomous. But it's very hard in a larger organization. Are we talking about sticking with the same people? Are we talking about changing mindsets? How do you implement this outside of the tech suite or the tech sector in a company?
Well, let's talk about the mindset. I think that's a good word, and it's a good way to think about what agility can bring to us all. And I think I would say for any person who has been experiencing the COVID crisis, it isn't just the workplace which has been disrupted. Our access to basic services has been disrupted. For those of us with children, the school experience has been massively disrupted. Going to the grocery store to get basic supplies has been massively disrupted. So there really isn't at the moment, a lot of predictability and a lot of clear rules that we can rely on for how we're supposed to engage in our lives and in our work. So the command and control toolkit is really bad at helping people, allowing people to move forward in the absence of instructions. It just doesn't work. If the command and control system is broken and there's no instructions, or if the instructions can't be delivered in time to accommodate change, which is often the case, life and work stops. What agility brings to bear is the notion of self-organization. At the core of agility, at its essence, is the idea that an individual and a team, and an individual within a team, and a team by itself and in relationship to other teams, has the potential to self-organize. And when a team self-organizes, it doesn't rely entirely on the conditions around it. It has an innate resilience. It can understand by itself and define the work that it's supposed to do, the way that it's going to do its work, and most importantly, the reason why it's going to do its work. It can do all of those things. It can decide what to do, how to do it, and why to do it in a scenario where information is limited, where information is always going to be limited. And it does that by giving teams the ability to interact with each other at both a work and human level that recognizes the reality of work.
So, when you say the reality of work, talk to me a little more about that. I find that fascinating. Is something we've been ignoring?
I wouldn't say we've been ignoring it, but again, I don't think all sectors have experienced this phenomena, and it's for sure the case that the software industry and the engineering industry were the first was the first sector to experience this. But when individuals and teams are expected to advance despite unknowns, in the face of unknowns, in the face of change, in the face of doubt, and even in the face of mistakes, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for that team and that individual to be in a predictive, linear command and control mindset. Because there will be too much time taken up simply gaining instructions. simply describing problems. When we empower individuals to define the work, to estimate the work, to interact with each other as equals in doing the work, it turns out we unleash a huge amount of creativity, a huge amount of engagement, and a huge amount of satisfaction with the work. And that output, that human output of making the work more meaningful and therefore better, is something that is very difficult to achieve in any other way.
But in the classic organization, and as a journalist, I've worked in a lot of newsrooms, which tend to be extraordinarily hierarchical, almost dictatorial. The editor-in-chief says, this is what will be in today's paper. You have to create incentives for people to perform in a certain way. And those incentives in traditional hierarchies are often, very clear. You meet these KPIs, you get this salary, this bonus, you don't get fired, you get this promotion, this trip if you're an ad salesperson, that kind of thing. And you also use those incentives to build loyalty to the organization, not to yourself. How do you prevent, in a situation like you're describing, which is much more decentralized, how do you prevent people from saying, gee, this is great, as long as they don't notice, I'm going to go do what really interests me? And, I think it gets the project further along. I think it makes a more interesting newspaper. And the editor says, as I can attest to myself, no, that's not what we're here for. That's not what our, subscribers are paying for. How do you realign these incentives and ensure that unsupervised people are still pulling in the same direction?
That's a great question, or bundle of questions, Peter.
Yeah, sorry.
It's a good stream. In a notion of agile or an agility, we have another notion, which is also a contradiction, or a contradistinction, I should say, with the traditional command and control model. And that notion is transparency or visibility. And what that means is that work is never hidden. The reasons for doing the work are never hidden. The outputs of the work are never hidden. And the costs of the work are never hidden. All the actors have equal access to nearly all the information. There may be some things that are management level need to know type things, but it works better when information is equally distributed. And that works in a lot of different ways. It means that individuals within a team will know that the work that they do is visible. The speed with which they do that work is visible. And the value that work does to the whole, the contribution that they're making, is visible, is measured, is known, and is quantified. So individuals and teams make visible the work they're doing, the quality of the work they're doing, the risks associated with that work, and the benefit that work delivers to the organization. You can't have agile without transparency. You don't have agile.
Brooklyn has a question from the audience. We're going to go live to Christelle
right
now.
I'm here. Thanks, Peter. Hey, David, we have a question in the comments on Facebook, and I want to invite everybody to comment on Facebook and YouTube. So, David, could you list some powerful agile killers you have experienced in the projects you have worked? And do you see quick win remedies? How about for the long run, too? It's a long question. It's a few questions at the same time.
Well, agile killers. I think some really good ways to kill agile. I would say let's start with my favorite, which is the false face stakeholders. Stakeholders who say they support agile, but really don't. That is the best way to kill an agile project. If the stakeholders or the sponsors aren't committed transparently to supporting the project and accept the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, the evolution of the work, it's not going to succeed. There's no chance that a brilliant team can overcome a a disingenuous project sponsor. And so the first thing to make sure is that the project sponsor really embraces Agile. There may be some doubts, but it has to be an open arms approach. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is well thought about in Agile, is that an Agile team doesn't have room for heroes. It doesn't have room for big egos. It doesn't have room for superstars. Those attitudes are lethal to an agile, an open, agile, transparent work mode, because the contributions of every team member are legitimate and critical, and the meetings, which, as we know in Agile, are called ceremonies, cannot be dominated by a single personality. And that is, and so, in Agile, Scrum, and the various methodologies and the various schools of thought, there's a lot of talk about managing the team and managing the personalities. So that's the second big killer. A third big killer, and I'll list four, is hidden agendas or hidden work. We talked about the concept of transparency. It is critical that all the work the team is trying to do and is expected to accomplish is visible. If any member of the team or the team itself is keeping work hidden, that is going to degrade the quality of the Agile experience, because the individual and team commitments won't be 100%. It's impossible. We don't want people working 20 hours a day or 15 hours a day for long periods of time. It's not productive. And so if the work is important, if the work is of value to the team or the stakeholders, it should be visible. The fourth killer, I would say, and maybe I'll be a little controversial in saying this, is something I'm going to call the false expectation of speed. What do I mean by that? Mm-hmm. Managers, sponsors, and executives sometimes are sold on Agile because they're told that it's a way to go fast and get things done quickly. And while it's true that Agile teams are obsessed with delivering value and avoiding waste, speed is not an intrinsic Agile virtue, and it is not the case that Agile team members are thinking about how to work quickly. What they're thinking about is how to avoid working on the wrong stuff and to work instead on the right stuff, and to do the right stuff in the right order, and to do it with minimal waste and maximum efficiency. The end result of a high-performing Agile team should be that you get the right stuff done first and quickly, and that's what we want to do. But it can be a very negative effect on the team if the expectations are that all they have to do is go fast, as if they're resistant to that idea somehow. So those are four things, and there are others that as I said, false expectations of stakeholders, big egos, hidden work, and false expectations of speed can really derail an agile excellence, the excellence of an Agile team.
Thanks, David. And I see another question just popped up. What will happen to the projects or companies who will not work in Agile mode?
Well, this is a big question and a good one. I don't want to say that I have all the answers to that. I think that in our personal lives and in our professional lives, we are all seeing massive change all around us, and for us as individuals and us as workers and for us as participants in companies, we know that we have to have a mindset that allows us to accommodate change, and for organizations that can't do that, it's going to be a harder path. Networks are only as durable as their ability to accept and accommodate change. And you know, we hope, I hope, that COVID-19 is the worst crisis that we experience in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. I really hope that, but it's a hope. It's an article of faith. It's a belief. It's not a rational expectation that I have. And so I think the more logical explanation is, hey, we've had this really big change in the world. We saw this manifestation of, well, let's call it the butterfly effect, a small local disturbance in Wuhan, China, through the scalability of positive reinforcement of the global pandemic has unleashed a catastrophic effect.
All right, give you back the button, Peter. Yeah. I'm gonna go away, remove myself. Thank you, David, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christelle. Well, David, you bring up a really interesting point here about durability. We had talked earlier about the concept of robustness versus resiliency, and we all tend to think that being robust is really important. It means you can withstand changes, withstand things that happen to you, but in fact, there's a lot more to that, and robustness does not actually equal resilience. And so when you talk about durability, it's important to start with the resiliency, I think. And I wonder if you could just walk us through that concept.
Yes, Peter. So, you know, in the notion of network theory, you have two virtues that describe the strength of networks. And one of those virtues is indeed robustness. And, you know, you hear this described a lot. You hear it on, you know, commercials for Verizon. They have a robust network, and what that means is that the network is strong. It's redundant. It has high throughput, high capacity. In effect, it has high resistance to change. So robustness means high resistance to change. Because I'm robust, I can withstand, I can be buffeted by these forces and not change. I can stay the same. I can deliver the same outputs despite these additional inputs. And that's important. We all want the cell phone system to work. You mentioned living up in temporarily in Litchfield, Connecticut. We discovered that our phone wires here were installed in the early 1960s. And so running the internet over these now ancient wires has its own challenges. They are not robust, it turns out. Luckily, we are resilient, which is the second attribute of networks. Resiliency is not the ability to withstand change, to resist it, but to accommodate it, to accept it, to find workarounds, to find new pathways, to recombine, and to accept that change is inevitable and normal and can be accommodated. And you know, we talked about this notion of the command and control model versus the agile model, and you know, there's a notion here of the bigger they come, the harder they fall. There is it is very difficult for any robust network to withstand the kind of forces that a global pandemic can unleash on it. The U.S. Navy can't, the meat industry can't, the health industry can't, the transportation industry can't. Hopefully the telecommunications industry is in good shape. But, you know, it's difficult. And so resilience is the key for us as individual and social and, commercial actors, being able to accommodate change and find new pathways.
So looking at specifics, I mean, you mentioned that we're suddenly realizing really are quite vital and important to our life in the 21st century. One is the telecom industry, and particularly mobile telecoms, or in your case, very, very non-mobile stationary telecom. And the other, you mentioned the meatpacking industry, which is suddenly, no one's thought about this for years. It's grown up as something that, originally farmers, it must have been an extraordinarily resilient industry because every farmer slaughtered his own cattle and took it to a market. And so if one guy's farm was destroyed in a flood or a fire, there were 20, 30 other families with farms who could supply the market. That's changed. I think there are 4 major meat packing companies now. They all do everything the same way. And then we hear that there are one packing house that handles 5% of the nation's pork, 900 cases of COVID, shutting the entire thing down, and surprisingly for 5% of the pork, disrupting the entire market. With telecoms, we talk about 5G, we talk about 4G, we talk about landlines, we talk about IoT and all these different things. But again, there has to be some kind of resiliency built into robustness. Maybe you just walk us through in either of those 2 scenarios, whichever one you prefer, what would that change look like? Long question.
It's a very good question. We can only speculate here. What the disruption is going to entail. A lot of it has to do with how long it lasts. But the large, vertically integrated, command and control, traditional production lines are at great risk because they don't have the ability to easily accommodate this kind of change. From what I understand, and getting to the edge of my knowledge here, the meat industry in the United States has, shall we say, seemed to benefit from a lack of regulation. That may not turn out to be long-term such a great thing. If regulations were imposed on the industry to affect worker safety in an equalized manner, it might actually be better for all the actors. But that doesn't seem to be what's going to be happening. So if we have large networks like that at risk and they fail, then I think maybe we'll return to smaller networks, as you said, Peter. We've seen that already in our personal lives in the food industry. For those of us who can, we prefer to buy meat and other products from local farmers. Maybe the big agricultural institutions will have a harder time surviving these kinds of disruptions. Maybe a society that depends on these highly disruptible kinds of corporations and kinds of structures isn't resilient.
Mm. And we're coming close to the end of our time slot, but I wanted to ask you one last thing, which you just sort of touched on here in talking about buying your meat from local farmers. This whole COVID-19's really thrown a curveball at people personally. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning from homeschooling to, just reliving our lives, changing how we think and do things. How do we adopt this agility and resiliency into our own lives? Simply beyond the corporation, because I think it's got to be a mindset change the way we're talking about this, that goes beyond I arrive at the office at 9 o'clock and I become resilient, then I go home and resort to my old-fashioned ways. So how do we incorporate this in our own lives?
Another, I think, provocative question here to try to pick up at the end of the session, Peter. I'll bring back something I mentioned earlier, and it's the disposition of an agile team. It's the 3 questions, not the 4, the 3 questions that the agile team has the inclination to ask itself. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And why are we doing it? And in an agile way, we want to answer those questions. We call it refining the work, refining the user stories, preparing the sprint backlog to, get really inside baseball, and we want to do that before we start the work, before we put that work in progress. That's the agile way in software development. But we can ask those 3 questions in our own lives as well. What am I doing? How am I doing it? And why am I doing it? And I think I mentioned homeschooling. I mentioned, which all of us are confronting. I mentioned access to healthcare, which is a factor for all of us. Going to the grocery store. These are things that we need to rethink. These are things we need to rethink how we do. And how do I interact with my friends? How do I keep in touch with my family? How do I occupy my time? If we have the disposition to ask ourselves what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it, I believe we'll do it better and with more satisfaction.
Well, thank you very much, David. Christelle tells me she's got another question from a listener or watcher.
Yes.
Can we go over to Christelle for a second?
Yes, the last question is for me even. What about having different levels of agile maturity in an organization? We often see that the development teams are agile, but not the rest of the company. What do you think about this topic?
I think that's really true. Agile grew up in the software industry. It was adopted because it sounded really good by the management consulting industry, and that's for sure the case. That agile and agility are going to not be evenly distributed within any organization. To maybe say one thing on this topic, I would say that one of the notions in agile is humility, and for those of us and those of you who consider yourselves agile practitioners, let's adopt a humble approach and help those around us and not be too proud.
Okay, well, David, thank you very, very much for joining us today on DEF CON 19 in PentaLive. That was David Golub of Pentalog. We are going to take a pause for a moment, and we'll be back with Pentalog CEO Fred Lanier coming to us from Orléans in the middle of France.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Okay, we're back. This is Peter Green here in PentaLive. We had some quarantine issues in France. Apparently, the internet was being quarantined, and Pentalog CEO Fred Lanier-Avec with it. So we're now in the war room with Fred Lanier, who is going to talk to us about resiliency and the era of COVID-19. Fred, I hope you were able to hear this really fascinating talk with David Golub about spreading the gospel of agility within corporations and to ourselves. Let me ask you, we look at this whole question of agility, resiliency, not only as a way of making a profit or surviving into the new era, but also as a way of controlling risk. So talk to me a little about that. How does agility and resiliency and complexity reduce risk for a company?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, just 2 words. The web was not collapsing in France. Actually, it was my Skype, which was completely frozen. I didn't know it. I tried to connect with it, and the screen was perfect, but it was not working. So again, I had to restart it and redo the whole stuff. Sorry for that. Whatever. Yes. Your question is extremely interesting, because yes, majority of people see when they think about agility, they think of more a way to drive a project, a way to deliver something. But indeed, agility can help a company do plenty of different things, including managing itself. Agility can be the whole framework for managing a company, and as part of it, there is indeed something specific to risk management. And yes, it was very interesting, the conversation we had the other day, which drove us to the topic of today with risk management in agility. And indeed, we have developed an experience in that company of risk management, which is extremely connected to agility. So first, to really to try to enter the topic, I'm sorry, but I have to refresh everyone on the fact that every single project in our company is driven through agility. So it means that for all of them, we have plenty of KPIs which are issued on a daily basis, and we decided, I think it's something like 8 or 9 years ago, to make a global risk management meeting 2 times a month, and to review all those KPIs for all projects to completely reassess a situation. And so having a really deep inside look the figures to completely review all of them. And at this moment, and so it means that we decided in the COVID-19 period to even do more risk management reviews and do it once a week. So we generate tons of risk management data in that period. And and indeed, it's a way to know what's happening concretely inside all of your projects, and so inside all the technical activities of all our customers on a weekly basis. And this is of course a fantastic help for the salesman, for those running the projects, to know what are the different risky situations we have in all of those projects. So I don't know if you catch the idea, but first it's generating very large volumes of project data, and precisely assessed through a risk management attitude. So it means it's risk. It could be a risk for HR. It could be a risk. It could be a specific technical risk, and of course, at the end, it's risk to lose potentially your customer. No. And this is extremely interesting. This is extremely interesting because as we are now into everyone looks at the period as something which is incredible, which has never ever happened. But what is the highest risk for companies? Isn't it to lose finally their customer? So I don't know if you catch what I mean. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'll leave you react.
So in other words, one of the things that comes out of an agile process or a decentralized, resilient process is that at every level, the people working on a project are also thinking about the risks and communicating this to the other nodes in the network.
That's it.
That's it. You don't have sales calling up on Monday and saying, hey, tech, you were going to deliver part 3 of the project to the client. And instead, a week before, they're saying, hey, this is the piece we're having difficulty with. Can we talk to so-and-so to move it forward, or let them know, or maybe there's a way to adjust, or ask them how important this piece is. And so you can adjust the risk and also be aware of it at all times.
Yeah, it's a constant attitude to think about the risk, and the risk can be of any. There are plenty of potential risks, and indeed it's more an attitude and to think risk management by design. So it's not something that it's not a reaction. And in the majority of the cases, and here agile management is here interesting. It's both a reaction, but it's also an action. It's also actions that you take all along the project life cycle, all along the duration of the delivery you have on something. You think about risk management, and a risk that you try to prevent for a customer in a situation can be useful for another one.
Right.
For another customer, another situation. And I used to compare, when I talk about risk management in general, I used to compare to make a comparison between what is a risk and what is an opportunity. And if you think of chance, of being lucky in life, what is being lucky in life? You're a lucky person when you nurture a strategy of development of opportunities. So being lucky, it means that trying to be lucky means that you nurture, that you develop plenty of opportunities everywhere. So it's the way to get lucky. So and I make the comparison with risk. What it is to be prepared for risk. The fact being prepared for risk, it means that you have identified a network of hypotheses exactly as you could identify it into chance, a network of opportunities. So it's exactly the same comparison. So you identify hypotheses, and to each of these hypotheses, you connect a tactic. You connect an agile tactic to address every single hypothesis. And so at the end, instead of being instead of getting a blast after a situation like the one we just had, you have plenty of existing tactics to address each of the hypotheses. Because at the end of the day, what's the problem for companies being into the present situation? It is losing their customer. It is to lose their customers. Right. So it means that, and that risk should have been prepared for a long time before.
Right. So if you're a restaurant, you should be thinking, well, what happens if there's a flood or there's something, and my customers still need to eat, but they can't come in and sit down and be served by, at a table with a tablecloth and a bottle of wine? How do I? Yeah. What are the other things I can do with my kitchen to keep myself in business and to keep a hold of my customers, which are the real thing that's the real property of your business, is that reputation among people who will spend money there.
Yeah, I have an example coming into my mind, which is the example of Netflix. Netflix generates plenty of problems constantly, automatically online. They generate plenty of bugs, and and that they do generate. We don't realize as a user, we don't realize that because they are prepared for all those problems. So they generate their own bugs online to see how the system adapts to those risks when they happen. So it is indeed
things like network interruptions, that kind of thing, connectivity issues,
And so I think it's the same thing for agile activities and for whatever it is, a marketing activity or a technical development activities for software, for web platform, for IoT, whatever it is. It's to be prepared for every single situation, which is not exactly a bug. But for instance, if you consider having a software development team of 10 people, you can imagine in the world of shortage, of scarcity that exists into the skills in our domain. Of course, you should be prepared for someone having a critical knowledge leaving the company. It's just an example, and that risk exists for every single project that we have. Okay, so we have to be prepared for that constantly, every time. And so having, like we have in the group, a very strong subsidiary called Skill Value, being able to identify constantly people, it means that we can prevent, and we have kind of a batch of candidates to constantly address the risk of anyone leaving a project and having a critical knowledge, and everyone has a critical knowledge in such projects.
It's interesting. So it's really about decentralizing not only authority and competence, but also knowledge. So that even if you don't have to use that knowledge 24/7 in your job, it's there in your own pocket as well for a time when you might need to draw on it and the other person's not there.
Yeah, imagine as a CEO, if you have several hundreds of projects running at the same time, how could you afford getting all the information for all projects? It is simply impossible. So this is why you have, through agility, to go for a decentralization strategy. And so at the end, risk management is not the job of a chief risk officer. It's the job of anyone being involved in the company through the question of responsibility existing into agility. For every agile project existing into a company, you have to think about the risk, and you need to have team members being extremely responsible of what they do. And being agile means that you constantly reassess a situation. You need to know where you are today to know where you want to go tomorrow. So this is why it is simply the risk management is completely embedded into agility. There is no difference between modern risk management and agility. It's the same thing, and it's true that it's very interesting at the end that of course, who was really prepared for a pandemic? Plenty of companies, they have plans, recovery plans for such situations like earthquake, pandemic. Depending on where they are. If they are Californian, they think a lot about earthquake and less about pandemic, maybe. But they have plenty of plans like that. And which is interesting is that those plans for very rare cases like earthquake or hopefully or pandemic. Actually, plenty of situations of such risk are actually covered by something that you can have if you do daily risk management into your projects. For instance, pandemic means people of your team could be personally infected by a virus, right? But if you do constant constant resources management, and you prepare for the risk of someone leaving, it means you might have a solution for it. It simply means that you might have a solution for it. So you can, whatever is the angle, or you take it from the upper side of the company, or from the actually you cannot take it from the upside of the company, because you cannot do it for, as I said, for all situations of all projects. But if you ask people to make their own risk management, it means that you're gonna be prepared for plenty of situations. And of course, at the end, the top management of the company, together with key roles in our organization, like the chief security officer, the chief infrastructure officer, those ones, they will prepare for such cases like big blasts, like a pandemic, like an earthquake, like a storm, whatever it is, to be prepared for more technical risk management with the networks, with the equipments, with the. So you see, at the end of the day, it's a global approach where you combine some very high level risk that people would call strategic. Like geopolitics. Also, sorry, I forgot to quote geopolitics there. But it's another kind of another type of risk we could take in consideration, especially if you think of companies like Pentalog. We have development centers in some zones sometimes, which are not precisely democracies, right? And we should be prepared for such things. We in Pentalog we have no units in. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So just to sort of sum it up, I mean, it's about decentralizing authority, decentralizing creativity, allowing people to participate in the process.
Yeah.
Because the ultimate result for a company is that you will get better results, you will be better prepared, there will be less unexpected that happens, you won't lose revenue as much, you won't lose your customers, you hope. There's a much better, greater resiliency.
Yeah.
Because your company has thought about these things, and even if it's some black swan that comes in that you never expected where you are, a meteorite hits your factory, people are already thinking there are alternatives. We looked at our competitors. We could buy this one, cooperate with that one, and move on. So it's really, I mean, it's just so fascinating how it's really a change in the way we think that we have already started, that many of us do in other ways, but that we really have to apply as a sort of whole life approach. So I think we're going to wrap up there because we have been on air for almost an hour. So I want to thank Fred Lanier, the CEO. You have one more thing to say?
Yeah, just one, because
Please.
I think it could be. I'm sorry, but
it's always fascinating listening to you, Fred. I could sit here for hours. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think as a conclusion, it's to give an example, to just exemplify what I was saying. When you imagine what happened around the 15th of March, depending on the countries, right, between 15th of March to 20th of March, when everything went into lockdowns. So after the different lockdowns, and at the end of March, we had lost 0 days of production. Zero. We have we count about 1,000, more than between 1,000 and one. I think in production it's a bit more than 1,000 people being involved, and we have not even lost 1 day because we had no one being infected, because also we were capable of switching completely the whole 1,000 employees working from home. So within a day, so we took the decision. We took it some days before the first confinement we had. I think the first one was the first official one was in France, I guess, that we had, and then it was some days later in Romania. But we took the decision 1 week in advance to completely send all our people home and work from home. And so at the end was no one being infected and no one and also no one being and no one losing his customer. And for our customers, it was not even 1 hour of programming activities, and it was critical at that time because some of our customers was in need for strong deliveries at that moment. It was very important for them to get the full support they could get from Pentalog. And so at the end, we have not even lost 1 hour of production in those days. So I think it was a good result for our teams.
Wow. Well, it's really interesting, and I hope it's a lesson that can be absorbed by our viewers and adapted to what they're doing. Thanks very much. That was Fred Lanier, the founder and CEO of Pentalog, our producer, Christelle Lazo in Brooklyn. Fred was in Orléans in France, and this is Peter Green in New York. Thanking you for tuning in to PentaLive and our last installment here of the day, which we call War Room. We'll be back next week with another edition of DEF CON 19 in War Room, and I hope to see you all then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Christelle. Bye.
Bye.